Hello, Professor Toybox here. I've got Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey with me, and we're back in my Fantasia toy box for another episode of Toybox Tutorials. Today we're continuing work on Mickey's first mission, which is to save the townspeople over there from the brooms. And I'll come into Smart Mode, and once again I'll show you what we've got set up so far over the past few weeks for those of you who are new to the series. So we have a dynamic trigger here in the town connected to a locator over there. And when you approach the village, it will trigger this enemy wave generator and this friend generator, which will put some brooms in the village and 5 townspeople that Mickey needs to save. We also have this townsperson set up over here as a mission giver. And when you approach and talk to him, he asks you to save his friends and deliver them to the base, which is the safety zone. And when you accept his proposal, the radar marker goes off of him and comes on over here in our safety zone. And this all works great, except that right now the player doesn't know how many townspeople they need to save or when they've saved the last one. And once they've saved the last townsperson, we need to turn off the second radar marker here and let the player know the mission's over. So that's what we're going to work on now. And the Creativi-toy that will help us do this is the counter. And that's our topic for today. So I'm going to come out over here for right now and come out of Spark Mode. And I'm already set up pointing to the counter in the Creativi-toys drawer. This is where you'll find this toy. And I'll drop one right here and come into Spark Mode and open the logic menu so we can take a look at this. The counter is a very simple toy. It just lets you count things. And you can use it to count whatever you want. And we'll look at the properties first. So under the properties, we have the target count. This is the count that you want to go to with this toy. And you can set this to whatever you want. 2 is the default. I can set this to 5 or 10 or 100 or whatever. Visible display just governs whether or not you see it on the screen or not. And right now it's on, but it doesn't show up unless something changes on the display. It's not always there, which is kind of peculiar. But the start reset count, this is where we're going to start from, which is 0 by default. And reset on target reached. So as we're counting, when we hit the target count, if we turn this on, this will automatically reset the count to that value. So that can be good if you're cycling through a few things. And to show you what you can do with the logic connections, I want to come out here and drop a couple more toys. And I'll show you kind of what you can do with this toy first. We'll put a text displayer here and a couple of buttons down. So we'll look at what this toy can do, and then we'll see how we're going to use it in our mission. So I'll put down 2 buttons. So we'll come into the first button here, and new logic connection. When the button is pressed, we'll come to the counter and open the menu. And there's 4 different things that you can do with this. Reset will reset the counter to the starting reset value, which right now is 0. You can increment the counter, which will make it count upward. Decrement makes it count downward. And this iterate through current count, I'll get to that in a moment, but this is like an auto count mechanism. And I'll demonstrate what that does. So first we'll increment the counter, and we'll go by 1. And so for right now, we'll come out here, and each time I press the button, the counter goes up, and you'll notice the counter changed, and now it appeared on the screen for a moment and then went away, which, as I said, is kind of weird. I'd like to see it there the whole time. Press the button a second time, now it changes to 2. Press it a third time, now it changes to 3. So we're counting upward, and we've gone past the target count, as you'll note, because I didn't change it. The target count was still 2. So you can count upwards beyond that. I'll go ahead and just change this to 5 for right now. So right now the count is set at 3. And changing the target count, I don't believe changes the actual value of the counter, so now we've changed it to 4. And on the counter itself, if we open the logic menu for that and do a new logic connection, these are all the trigger signals that the counter will broadcast, and you can hook these up to other toys to do things. So target reached, right now it's 5. So if I press the button again, that will trigger the target reached signal, and I can hook that up to something. If you want to count downwards, 0 reached, and we'll look at that a little bit later, but when you hit 0, then this will broadcast a trigger signal. And each time the count changes, this one gets broadcast. So every time I increment it or decrement it by however much, this signal will get broadcast. So you can know each time the counter changes, you can use that to trigger some other toy. And then there's these two, iteration cycled and iteration process completed. And these are kind of part of the auto count mechanism. And so I'll demonstrate that because I haven't seen very many videos on this. So I'm going to hook up the trigger signal here so that when the iteration cycled trigger signal is broadcast, I'll come over to my text displayer and we'll come down under greetings and say hello. And new logic connection on the counter. When the iteration process is done, we'll come over to our text displayer and say goodbye. And to make this easy to see, I'm going to come into the text displayer and set the properties so that text duration 2, we'll leave that on for right now. Text style, I'm going to set this to banner, and that'll make it easier to see as you saw in an earlier video. And now the second button I had dropped down, I'm going to set this up so new logic connection when pressed. We'll come to our counter and we'll do iterate through current count. And this starts the auto count mechanism. So this is going to start basically at 0 and count up to the current value of the counter, which right now is 4. And each time that counter goes off, it'll broadcast the cycled signal, and you'll see what that does. So if we press the button, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, and now the cycle is complete and it says goodbye. So that's kind of like I said, an automatic counting mechanism that you can use the counter for when you set it to some value, and then you can set it up to automatically count, and it'll just sit there and cycle through 1, 2, 3, 4, right up to that current counter value. So that's something really handy that, again, I haven't seen used in too many videos, and certainly didn't see it explained. I kind of figured that out from playing around with it. So now that we've kind of seen what the counter can do, let's see how we would use that in our mission. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these, and we'll drop down a brand new counter with the default values set so that we can see how we will increment or integrate this into our mission. So we're going to use this to keep track of the number of townspeople. And we're going to count the number of townspeople that we're working with. And I want my counter to count downward. So I'm going to come into the properties. And because I want to count downward, we're going to start at 5, which is the number of townspeople we put into the village. And you'll notice if we come up here to target count, I'm going to try to change this to 0. And when I press OK on my Wii U screen, it tells me that that's out of range. So you cannot enter 0 as a value for the target count, which is kind of a bummer, but there is a workaround for that. So because I can't set that, I'll set that to 1. Doesn't really matter because I'm not going to use the target count. I can't because I can't set that to 0. And so our target count will be 1. We're going to start at 5. And so each time we throw a townsperson into this trigger area, into the safe zone, we want to change the counter. So on the trigger area, we're going to do a new logic connection when entered by AI friend. So every time a townsperson's thrown in here, we'll come over to our counter and we will decrement it by 1. So that will make it count downward. And you know, there's nothing to prevent Mickey from holding on to the townsperson and jumping into the trigger area and jumping out. Players do goofy things like that a lot. So what I want to do here is we'll come in and do another logic connection when exited by AI friend. So if a townsperson happens to get out, and that's one example I just mentioned of how that could happen, we'll put the counter back up by 1. And so that way we'll always be sure that the counter reflects how many townspeople we've saved and how many are left to be saved. So that takes care of the trigger area here. So every time a townsperson comes in, we're going to change the counter. And so that will help us keep track of the number of townspeople we've saved and how many we have left to rescue. So now we can use the counter to trigger the end of the mission. And as I said, we couldn't set the target count to 0, but what we can do is when we come into new logic connection on this, instead of using target reached, we can use 0 reached, because it'll continue decrementing past the target count, which I set to 1, and so that's fine. So on 0 reached, one of the things we want to do is turn off this radar marker here. So we'll go ahead and deactivate that, and that'll turn that off. And it'd be nice to let the player know that the mission's complete. So we'll come out here and drop down another text displayer. And I'm going to go ahead and set the properties on this. We'll set the text duration to 4 and the text style to banner so we can't miss this. And so on the counter, new logic connection when 0 is reached, not only will we turn off that radar marker, but we can come over to the text displayer and we can come down to the missions category. And we can tell the player that the mission's complete or they've succeeded. I'm going to use thank you for your help. And that'll let the player know that the mission's done. And another thing I'd like to do, because one of the things, as I mentioned, is you could be holding the townsperson and jump into the trigger area and jump out. So on 0 reached, we've done all of this. But if we were holding the townsperson and jump back out, that would cause the counter to go back up. And I don't really want to do that. So on the counter, we can do a new logic connection when 0 is reached and the mission is done. Just to make sure nothing strange goes on with this trigger area, we can go ahead and deactivate that. And that way it doesn't matter what's going on over here. The mission's over and none of these toys need to be doing anything. So that's what we've got there. And I think that's just about everything we need to do. Just reviewing my notes. One thing more I'd like to do is on the text proposal accepted, so on the mission giver, on the text displayer, on a new logic connection when the text proposal is accepted and we've started the mission, I'd like to make sure that this counter is set properly, so we'll do a reset on it at that point. And I've noticed sometimes when you do that, just because you set the property over here and you've done the start reset count and we changed this to 5, that doesn't set the current value of the counter. And so by doing this step, when we accept the mission and resetting the counter, that'll take that start value and make that the current value of the counter. So when the mission starts, the counter will be at 5. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And so we'll come out here and test this now. And once again, we should go ahead and save. Now that we've set all of this up so that If something goes wrong, we can always reload the toy box and start over. Okay, so let's see how the counter helps us make this mission a little bit smoother. So we come over the bridge, which starts the enemy and friendly wave generators. We come over to our townsperson, and he says, deliver the friends to the base for extra loot. And we'll say continue, and the radar marker goes off of him, and you'll notice the counter showed up above, set to 5. Again, it was real brief, which was kind of a shame, but now we'll come into town, and we'll save our townspeople. Hey, get back here. I'm trying to save you. Stand still. And they're fleeing from the villagers, or from the brooms, of course. And so now we'll throw this guy into here, and you'll notice the counter changes to 4. And the villagers are happy, and they rejoice. And we save another one, the counter goes down, and the villagers rejoice. There we go. And we'll come over here and put him in there, and now there's 2 left. And just to show how nice it is to have the exit set up, if we happen to come over here and try to throw him in. Oh, nope, the target count changed. Anyway, if he bounced off that wall like he's done in earlier videos, the counter would have gone back up as he passed out of the trigger area. So now we have 1 townsperson left to save, and there they are. And we come over here. And we'll throw them into the trigger area. And there we go. It says, thank you for your help. So that was good. So the counter helped us keep track of how many townspeople we had left to save, and we could use that to let the player know when the mission was over. So this mission's looking pretty good, but I still think we can make it a little better. One of the parts that's lacking, I think, is the ending. It's nice that it tells us we're done, but I think we can add a small celebration and make the ending a bit more exciting. So next time we'll look at a couple of Creativi-toys that can help us do that. Meanwhile, thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it helpful. If so, please give it a like, and don't forget to sign up on my blog or subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already done that, so you don't miss the next episode. For now, Mickey and I are signing off from my Fantasia toy box, and we'll see you next time.